Hello everyone, and welcome to this very special RCA Vice-Chancellor's talk with Es Devlin. My name's Helen, I'm the Director of Development and Alumni Relations for the College, and I will be taking us through some brief housekeeping points before we get underway. This evening will be the 5th instalment of the RCA Vice-Chancellor's talks, sharing the experience and knowledge of some of the most influential names in art and design, and bringing together the College's global community. Some housekeeping. We are recording this event and a copy of it will be available for staff and students to watch again on Moodle afterwards. All questions have been submitted in advance, so we won't be using the chat or raise your hand functions during the event. Now I'm delighted to introduce the RCA's Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Paul Thompson, to commence this evening's proceedings. Paul, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody. And welcome to the RCA. It gives me real pleasure to invite as our guest this evening Es Devlin. She is an extraordinary artist and designer, and she spent her life collaborating with some incredible people, writers, artists, musicians, dancers, poets, even theoretical physicists. I think Es can best be described as a large-scale performative designer. She's creating sculptures, experiences, and environments that combine art, music, technology, light, and sound. Her approach is really quite unique and very difficult to describe in words. Those of you who've had the pleasure of seeing one of her productions will know that it can take place at the Royal Opera House, Sadler's Wells, the Serpentine opposite the college, the Barbican, the V&A, Olympic ceremonies, the Brit Awards, catwalks for Louis Vuitton, and of course the touring stage sculptures for the likes of Kanye West, Beyonce, U2, Lady Gaga, Stormzy, and Adele. The list really is endless, and the venues are unimaginable. Es learned to play the violin at an early age, I'm told. She then studied English literature at Bristol University before going on to do a foundation and then a theatre design course at Central St Martin's. Before starting her own practice, she spent time working at London's Bush Theatre. For those of you who are studying at the RCA, new to London, I highly recommend the Bush Theatre. It is the most wonderful place. And similarly at the National Theatre, which is also a wonderful venue. Her studio is based in London, and her team of associate designers are regular contributors, and regular contributors include some RCA students, Robert McIntyre, who studied product design, Amelie White and Matteo Mastrandrea, both studied architecture, and of course design engineer Benton Ching, who left the college quite recently on the IDE programme. Es has won a number of awards and accolades. She's got the London Design Medal. She's won 3 Olivier Awards. She's a Royal Designer for Industry, elected by the Royal Society for Arts, and she was given an OBE in 2015. There's so much that we want to ask you, and I would be hogging the mic if I spent all the time talking to you, Es. But I'm going to hand over to somebody who is much more expert talking about your field of design, called Professor Graham Brooker. He is Professor of Interior Design and a big fan of your work. When I said to Graham that we were going to ask you to talk at the college and would he moderate, he was really excited. The email response came back very, very quickly, I can tell you. So thank you, Graham, very much indeed for agreeing to chat with Es this evening. Thank you both. And we look forward to hearing your conversation.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ez. Paul's right. The email dropped into my inbox and I was straight on it because I really, I'm really been looking forward to chatting with you. And I have about 20,000 questions, but we only have about 20 minutes before we invite the students in. So forgive me if I kind of rush through things, etc. But there's so much I want to speak about. But anyway, let's begin. Just, how are you? How are you faring in this context for beginners, for starters? Because, I know that you have your home and studio are quite closely aligned. And as we're all aware in this context, our homes and our workplaces have kind of become entwined. So how are you getting on in this context, and how are you separating out this wonderful world of living and working?
Listen, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to meet you, Graham. Listen, it's gone through phases, really. I'll take it bit by bit, because it's really been a year, hasn't it?
Yeah,
so March the 23rd, I have a picture in my mind, actually, of Matty, one of the guys who works with me, who came through the RCA and actually teaches there still, picking up his computer. And I just looked around the room, everyone was picking up their computer and walking out. And as you say, I work in a very modest, we're sitting in the room where I work. There's a little bit behind me, a little bit in front, a little room over there. And it's quite small, modest sort of domestic pair of rooms in the front of a house, a very kind of, 1940s kind of red brick house in Southeast London. And so that was the beginning of it. People up sticks and left. And then I became a little bit like, one of my friends called me a little bit like a sort of demented band leader. And I was on these Zooms every day with everyone, and driving my poor team completely apeshit, because I was just saying, right, we're doing this. And then, I don't know if any of you know the film Inside Out. It's a very, very beautiful film, I think, where the inside of a child's brain is, expressed as architecture, and parts of memories start to collapse. And I had that sensation as while I was trying to encourage my team of 8 people of my designers. At the same time, I was getting through text saying, and this project's gone down, and this one's gone down, and someone said to me at a certain point, like, look, just calm down for a minute. You don't need to whip this into a frenzy the whole time. So there was a period of, I actually made some work on my own. I really enjoyed the emptiness of the studio. It's a mess now, but it was very tidy for a month or so. But then I have to say, the panic kind of set in, because I have a large overhead. For me, for what I do, it's quite a large overhead. It's quite a lot of people to pay, frankly. And I became like a kind of startup. Only when I started up, when I was around, I guess, 25, when I began my practice, I wasn't a startup. It was just me. The way that theatre design works is more like a sort of apprentice system. You work for someone, and then someone invites you and gives you a little opportunity, and you don't really employ anyone until quite far down the line. You might just employ them for one day a week to help you on a model or something. So when I really did start up, I wasn't a startup, but here I was in the middle of my life, in the middle of my career, with quite large responsibilities, suddenly surrounded by amazingly talented people some of my people have been with me 12 years, I really didn't want to lose any of them. So I became like this kind of frenzied hustler, I was just on the fucking hustle, just, randomly. Some of my studio came in, actually, the ones who live locally, and they said it's just like being on Radio Es, because I was sitting here doing a random Zoom call saying, let's have a Zoom call, just hustling for any bit of work. And actually the hustle paid off. So weirdly, from, I guess, around the summer, I guess the middle 2 quarters of last year were pure hustle, and a lot of good and interesting thought work. We're quite a busy studio, so it was good for us to just do some thought pieces, and there's some very good thinkers in the studio. So I think people enjoyed that. And then, from summer onwards, those kind of seeds of hustle, came good. And we've been doing some really interesting work that we wouldn't normally have done. And there's a lot of quite exciting work now for this year and next year. So it's been a period of growth, I would say. And as you say, that congruence of home and work is always with me. But because I have not been traveling as much, some personal things have definitely, reared their heads and been very, very difficult, I would say. It's been a difficult time personally, for sure.
And do you actually get to shut the door on the studio and say, that's it? Or is it always with you?
No, this is one of my pieces of kind of personal growth, I guess, I've been trying to do, is to walk out of my studio at 7 o'clock, get changed, put on a different piece of clothing, and light some candles and cook, because I haven't been much of a cook, I have to say. So I've tried to start cooking and listening to different music, and tried to carve out some more dimension within. I mean, within this interior, within the boundaries of this interior, how can I create more worlds? You know, the globe that I'm used to, you know, rattling around, how can I create that space within this set of, you know, Victorian and 1940s rooms that I exist in a project?
And how, as I'm really fascinated by this, because I as an interior designer, you know, often when I say I'm an interior designer, people instantly go, oh, can you do a kitchen or a bathroom, etc., etc. And I kind of go, I can, yeah, but it's not really the main thing that we do. People describe you as an artist, as a designer, etc. And I noticed once online you were deliberately not describing yourself as a set designer. How do you describe yourself? What do you think are the kind of key?
You know, I've used this technique of the hijack regularly, and my own name and the descriptive phrases that people use about me, I have slightly tried to hijack occasionally.
Yeah.
Not least because of the hierarchies I encounter. You know, one of the things that's come to pass in my practice is I collaborate with some very powerful characters, a lot of male characters who are immensely creative and powerful. And I guess part of the 25-year journey has been, how do I not lose myself? How do I grow? And I think it's probably interesting to many of the people listening to this who will end up collaborating. You know, many of us end up applying our art form or collaborating. And how does one give names to the collaboration that defy the hierarchies that pre-exist the collaboration? And because of the frameworks in which I was working, set designer was aglow with hierarchical placement within the structures within which I was working, the opera houses, the theatres. And I was resistant to those hierarchical structures. And I felt that the collaborations were not correctly or justifiably defined by those hierarchies. So I tried to hijack the nomenclature in order to resist the hierarchies, really. And that's why I've used varieties of names. And artist is an interesting name. And you'll notice that so many musicians have done that as well. You know, musicians were musicians. They were pop stars. They were whatever they were. They were recording artists, and then they started calling themselves artists. And it became also, I think, something that happened particularly in the community of Black musicians as well. You know, resistant to hierarchies that they were being put in, and to reductions of their status and their practice in nomenclature. So I think it's an interesting area, and I encourage anyone to try out some different names. You know, it's up to you, and it's shocking how quickly they catch on. You know, I was terrified in 2016. I was working on a project in Peckham, and the wonderful people at ID Magazine who were promoting the project stuck a little board in front of this mirror maze I'd done, and they wrote artist. And I was like, oh, you can't do that. You know, people, I'll be torn to shreds. You know, they'll call me a jumped up set designer. You better not do that. And they were like, no, do it. And that was only 4 years ago, you know. So I really invite anyone listening to this, just call yourself what the fuck you want and try it out and see how you feel in that name. It's a good way to try growing, you know.
Brilliant. I'm with you all the way on that one. I noticed, I read somewhere, or I think I might have seen online, and I really sort of share this with you. I think really we're probably of a similar age. I think I might be a touch older than you, but you once described yourself as a child of Thatcher, and I share that unfortunate position with you. Something I try and resist every day. And politics, you know, in design is critical, obviously. How do your politics shape what you do? How does it feed into your work?
I mean, listen, I look at my daughter now, who's 13, and I am blown away by how informed she is compared to how ill-informed I was. I feel like I was incredibly ignorant. I didn't pick up on things. I didn't have a clear worldview. I was privileged, incredibly privileged, growing up in the southeast, you know, rural England, in my little school that I went to. And I traveled deeply through literature and through art and through culture. But I would say it took me a long time to wake up to really the shape of the country that I was living in. And I applaud, you know, my own daughter for being way ahead, and her generation generally. And it's something, you know, we decry the Instagram generation, the social media generation, but there are, I think, some really positive sides to it. Her awareness of American politics, of global politics, of climate politics, is so sophisticated, age 13, way beyond what mine was. I think really growing up, when I said that thing about being a child of Thatcher, if you think, I was 8 years old when the Conservatives came in, and that shift in 1997 felt like a personal shift. It felt like a shedding of an identity that had enshrouded all of us, and our attitude, I think, towards our country. I remember going to Boulogne. The school trip was to Boulogne, to a boulangerie. You went to Boulogne to a boulangerie to buy a baguette, as long as you knew those 3 words. But I remember this must have been about 19. Oh my God, I was probably like 81 or something. But we went on the ferry from Dover, but we were embarrassed to say we were from England. We thought England was a crappy place. Honestly, we didn't like the Union Jack flag. We thought it was either a representative of empire or National Front. We thought we knew England had a reputation for crappy food, for unemployed. It wasn't a place to be proud of. And in fairness, whatever we want to say now about the mistakes made by New Labour and the Gulf War and all the things that we know went wrong, there was a shift between 1997 and the Olympics up to 2012, and the attitude. I think the Olympics was an important moment. The way that Danny Boyle was able to find our ability to perhaps shift our attitude towards our own country at that point. So anyway, it's been an interesting time to live through, hasn't it? And then the shift back with the Brexit.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, kind of like feeling like the Thatcher project is still ongoing, really, isn't it?
Well, I remember actually the night of the results, I was coming back from Glastonbury, and we had just done Adele's performance. I say done, she had performed. I had stood in the vicinity, and I had to be at the Donmar warehouse, stupidly, at like 9 a.m. or something. So I had a car that was going to drive me from Glastonbury to the Donmar warehouse, leaving Glastonbury at 2 a.m. or something. And I got in the car and I thought, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm just going to sleep this whole journey because I've got to be on form for tomorrow. And I said one word to the driver before I went to sleep. And I just said, look, he said, how are you? And I said, well, obviously devastated about the Brexit result. And he said, oh no, I voted for it. I was like, okay, this guy's 20 something. I'm not going to go to sleep. I'm now going to spend the rest of this 4-hour journey from Somerset to London. And I asked him, I tried to understand the vote, I tried to understand his attitude. And he just said to me, look, I don't really understand it, but I feel like a change. I feel like we need a change. And I get that. But I realized it was a generational thing that he hadn't lived through, what we'd lived through in the 80s. So a change felt like a change would definitely be for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to shift a little bit. I want to talk to you a bit about, I've got so much to cover. I'm kind of excitedly jumping around. I want to talk to you a little bit about tools. I'm with my students, and if there are any who are watching, they'll attest to this. In interiors, we spend a long time talking about media tools, and we love hands-on material and working and building. And I sense a bit of that sensibility with you, actually. And I just wondered about your sort of choice of tools. I know you love drawing. You talk eloquently about paper and books. I've seen before. What are your tools of choice, Ez?
I mean, I do think anything that is labor intensive and manual creates a different type of thinking. And I really enjoy when this boring old accountant in my brain gets bypassed for a minute by some kind of magic that happens between the tips of the fingers, their engagement with scissors, pen, pencil, scraping, painting, layering, whatever tool it is, and the old lizard bit of the brain. So I enjoy paint a lot. I would think anyone who knows me knows that I'm a bit of a control freak. So it's very good for me to put myself in situations where I'm not in control. So, water, covering a piece of paper, a good thick bit of watercolor paper with water, and then allowing the materials to behave independently of my will and desire for them to do things I want them to do. And actually, you know, sculpting clay, allowing the material to interact back, to talk back, you know, and anything that will talk back, anything that will defy my efforts to control it.
And does the talking back then feed directly into the work?
Well, exactly. And it's like that in any collaboration, you know, that I think that's why I'm gravitating always towards collaborators who will bring ideas, you know, that I wouldn't have thought of. But the materials itself do that, you know, paper does that. Paper will, you know, and I like paper a lot because what I work with habitually is concrete and, you know, not concrete itself, but, you know, brute, heavy. There's very little of what I work with that I can pick up with my own hands in my large scale performance work and in the large scale sculptural work. You know, I can't carry any of it. It's stuff that requires 72 trucks to march it about. And when I see it, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't even reach it. So I think, you know, having a piece of paper, which, you know, the laws of physics are very forgiving around paper. You know, if you get the right piece of paper, it will retain structural integrity and it'll stay standing up. You can bend a corner and that will, you know, stand up and not blow down. So I do find paper, you know, a way of making quick ideas that then I will then, without any kind of apology, hand over to the brilliance of engineers to then figure out how does that translate into something which will resist wind speeds and sit outside for many years in the snow and things.
And I sense that I've also seen you talk, and again, I really am fascinated by this idea of primary and secondary texts and responding to them. And I love that kind of way that you talk about oscillating between these situations, you know, and I think that's a really particular sensibility as a designer. Is that how you feel, you know, all of these things and your collaborators, the materials that you work with, they seem to be talking to you all the time and you're almost kind of shaping the conversations with these things. Is that how you read it as well? Or
I mean, I think it may be an affliction, you know, I think it may be an illness that is coming in handy, but I do, you know, I grew up on a street called Mermaid Street and I grew up halfway up the street and the street used to be water at the bottom and air at the top. And, you know, these things may all be coincidences, but I think this kind of placing oneself or placing myself in a kind of often kind of impossible position, like an elastic band between two almost irreconcilable impetuses. So for example, a piece of text is a piece of text, right? It's really happy being a piece of text. It doesn't want to be a set and it doesn't want to be concrete. It wants to just be fucking text. And the same with a piece of music, you know, and a conversation with a musician is often a very abstract conversation. It's nebulous. And when you sit, you know, late into the night, conjuring what you might make with a musician, it might be this, we could do this, we could do this. That's a very gorgeous place to be, and many, you know, wonderful and rich and rewarding and growthful moments in my life have been spent in those conversations. Then I have these other conversations with the fish part of me on, which are with, you know, engineers and accountants and quantity surveyors, and those conversations about, well, how the fuck is this thing going to stand up, and how are we going to put it into a lorry, and, you know, how can you afford to make it out of this, and how will this be remotely sustainable anyway, and then you have to be the kind of elastic band between those two conversations, because there's this fateful day where you turn up on site and your beautiful, gorgeous artist, dear friend who you love, and you love those conversations, and your gorgeous, fantastic technical directors and builders who you also love, all meet, and you are this piece of elastic that has promised them both the world. and how does this thing in the end, you know, achieve everything you promised to one and everything you discussed with the other? And it's, you know, it's a sort of affliction, I guess, that must have developed in me from a young age, and I've found, you know, a way to put it to use in life, I guess. But yeah, there's a tension for sure between primary text and you know, the concrete matter that we try and make in response to it.
Yeah, I'm conscious that we've got some students who and some questions, so I'm gonna kind of ask you just one more thing, and then we'll launch into the student questions. But you've got numerous RCA guys working with you, and I'm sure Benton is listening in, and hopefully he won't be too embarrassed. But what is it about these RCA guys?
Do you know, it's never that I go to the RCA and look for people to work in my studio. It's always that I put out a call, people apply. In the beginning of my practice, it was, word of mouth. Then from about 5 years ago, I started really concertedly trying to build a studio. And always what I'm looking for is a quality of thought, a quality of curiosity of mind, as much as an engagement with materials and visual forms. So the thinking and the critical thought, and the robustness of that thought, and the robustness in the face of me, because my studio all, I hope and I think, feel confident to say, Ez, that's a really shit idea, or we've got a better idea. How about this? And I have found the Royal College applicants. I only find out they're Royal College sort of towards the end of realizing the work is beautiful and they are fantastic. So yeah, they've come through.
I'm going to apologise now for the 16,000 application letters that will come ringing through your front door.
Always welcome.
Okay, listen, I really feel that we should hand over to some of the students and their questions. I've taken up enough of your time. We've got the first one, which is Mariona Ruiz Perez. Mariona, are you there? I'm hoping she'll come through. There she is, coming through, I think. Mariona's a student on the MSc MA Innovation Design Engineering.
We can form a girl band. I think we're wearing those matching.
Yeah. Mariona, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, Es, pleasure to meet you. My question is, how do you feel COVID will shape the future of live music, and how can spaces ensure safe engagement of the crowd and the artist? Thank you.
Well, we just did the Super Bowl. There were a lot of cardboard people in attendance, I can tell you that. 50,000 people were made of cardboard, so they were safe. They were also quite handy because they had lights stuck to them. 7,500 of the people were vaccinated. They were vaccinated frontline workers, so they were considered safe. The other 18,000, I presume, were not vaccinated, and they were socially, distant and separated. I think it'll be ways like that we start to piece it together. I think the vaccination within this country will open up a lot of possibilities. It's basically not really possible, I would say, to maintain the social distance in many of the things that we do. That's just the brute reality of it. It doesn't really work out financially for those venues. They just can't operate really with that space. They will try. They will absolutely be doing the very best they can. There's so many venues that want to offer, for our cultural national health, they want to offer provision. And as you know, the National Theatre was open and had done a ton of work on creating socially distant spaces and beautiful, brilliant work and offering really great shows, as had the Almeida and the Donmar. So as the minute it's allowed, all of those places will be back up and running because the people want to work and they want to, make it possible. I think there will be tours will be more national and regional before they become international again. I think there will be problems around international touring, just to do with how do you cross borders, how do you keep people safe, different regulations. At the moment, obviously it's barely possible to travel at all. So I think that will take. I think the touring big pop show will take a long time to recover. And I think in the meantime, lots of new ideas are brewing that will take its place for a bit and allow those musicians to reach their fans in different ways with a smaller carbon footprint, which is good. Equally, I don't think there will be shows again that are just physical. There will always be a digital component of it, which is good for those who can't access, for accessibility, for people who are disabled, for people who can't get there, people who don't have the money to get there. So this is all a good thing, that we will not ignore the digital audience. It will be digital and physical as we move forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Mariona. Nice question. Ez, I was struck by when you did the work for Wire, the anatomy of a band, they're sort of separate compartments. Maybe that was thinking years ahead of COVID.
Yeah, they'd still be there now if someone hadn't got outstanding. Nice.
Our next question
Maybe
is
they still are. Maybe they're still.
They could still be there. Yeah. Our next question is Emma Hampshire, who is a textile alumni who graduated from textiles in 2019, and she's got the next question. Hi, Emma. Do you want to ask Ez your question?
I love your back of shot.
Yeah, that is cool.
It's my work.
It's beautiful. It's actually one of my very, very dearest friends studied at the Royal College. She's called Ptolemy Mann. She's a woven textile artist. I normally have some of her work in the back of my shop, but she's doing work that relates to what you're doing. You should look it up.
I'm a big fan of hers.
Special woman.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely to meet you. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. My question is, how were you able to take control of large-scale projects that work across several mediums?
Control is a bit of a trigger word for me right now, but I guess really the secret is in that word, which you've chosen carefully and well. You don't control quite those very big projects. They are monstrously big, you know, they are, each department will tell you they're in control of it. For something like the Olympics or the Super Bowl, or you know, any huge scale opera production, or even any modest scale opera production, there are so many departments. It's a bit like your body. You know, we think we're in control of our bodies, but the microbes think they're in control as well. And we're just the conglomeration of the microbes. And I think the secret is to acquiesce to that and to enjoy that, and to really love the people that you're working with, and to really, you know, relish their different skills. You know, the departments you don't even think of. You know, you're a visual artist, so you don't think about the guy who's designing the cabling or the speaker system or, you know, the aircon or whatever it is, but these things are all crucial, or the security. So I think the key to it is to not get frustrated by the various departments that you don't quite understand and that seem to be getting in your way, but to learn about them, to be informed about them, and to really, you know, admire them. And then you might find ways that your craft can express itself in a more deeply connected way to all the other brilliant crafts. And it's to do with the art and the craft of collaboration, really.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for the question. Great question. What do you like as when things are going wrong and you start to want to shout and scream at people, because you seem incredibly stoic and relaxed about the whole process?
This is one of my problems, it turns out. I'm preternaturally calm. And people get quite, there's one wonderful director I worked with and things were really going horribly disastrously wrong, and I was just sitting there. She said, why? Yeah, I sit quietly. It hasn't ever worked. Shouting hasn't ever got me anywhere. I'm told I need to practice anger and shouting more, so I'm going to try, but whenever I've done it, I think I kind of, you know, feel like I'm driving a car a bit too fast and I'm out of control of it, and it doesn't really get me anywhere.
Yeah.
So I've gone perhaps a bit too far the other way. I just go sort of preternaturally calm and maybe become a bit disgustingly passive aggressive occasionally. You've ever noticed that?
Right. Our next question is Christian Pugsley, who's a student on MA Global Innovation Design. Christian, come on in. Where are you? There he is. Hi, Christian.
Hello. How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, so my question was a little bit more in the abstract sense. So seeing as your projects and your work, you know, each one has a different context, a different purpose, different presentation medium. With such a wide variety of options, like where do you tend to start from for inspiration?
Well, I've built up, I think, in my studio, you see sort of at the top on that top shelf behind me, there's a sort of library of forms which I've been engaging with for the last 25 or maybe 45 years. And they are they're helpful frameworks to me. So often I won't decide that I'm going to revisit a form that I've been exploring for a while, but I will eventually find it's a helpful tool. I will also just try to go to the most alien part of the project. You know, the first thing is to immerse myself in the stuff about which I know nothing. And in every project there is that. So the primary text itself, you need the context to the primary text, whatever it is. It's the lyrics, I need to understand what they all mean. It's, the text or a libretto or the text of a play, understand. I get frustrated if I don't understand why the author wrote it. So that's a lot of work. Or even, for example, we're often collaborating with other designers. So I need to understand, I can't just take the work. So if I need to understand why did they make those decisions? And that requires a lot of research. And research is, of course, as anyone listening knows, it's the most wonderful thing because there's no deliverable. It can go on forever. So I will happily be lost in research. I don't have as much time as I used to, unfortunately. So often it's my studio who do the research now. They go off on these gorgeous rabbit holes of research and then present beautiful big decks of research to me. And I now kind of scan them, often quite fast, if I'm honest. And I just find the things that kind of, I guess now at the point I am in my practice, I tend to scan across a research document that's been put together on my behalf by my brilliant studio. And then I will sort of find the threads that I guess weave into a larger story that I've been weaving over the 25 years. And at this point, I'm starting to be more conscious of the pattern through it and of trying to sort of pull the threads together. I'm not going quite as blindly as I used to at the beginning of my practice, if I'm honest.
Totally makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Great question. And you're, you're obviously a bibliophile like myself. I'm fond of the odd book or two. Does it still work for you as a medium, as kind of post-it notes and picking stuff out from your library and so on?
I'll be honest that often I'm lazy and I know there's a book up there, but I would just go online and find the image that I know is in the book. So that's the truth of it. And yet I buy shitloads of books. I'm always buying books. And this is like a fraction of my library because it wouldn't all fit when I moved to the studio. But I love books more than anything. And I like giving them to people, passing them around. There are certain books that I just buy again and again, and they are like little talismanic things that go, through my friendships.
Yeah.
The concrete aspect of a book, the sculptural object of a book fascinates me.
Yeah, I'm the same. Little notes in corners, covered in post-it notes. The next question I'm going to read out because it's somebody actually. Unfortunately, can't be here, but it's from Asif Kapadia, who is an honorary doctorate at the RCA, but he was an alumni. He graduated from the RCA in film and television in 1997, and so he unfortunately can't be here, but I'm going to read his question out. And the question originally started in a slightly more fruitier language, but it's been toned down for me to read to you. But it is, how is the world of design going to be affected by Brexit if you're based in the UK? And the word for Brexit was something slightly more saltier.
Yeah, well, it's not good. Particularly in music. I mean, there's been quite a lot of coverage recently. I think Elton John came out and wrote a very succinct piece, I think, about the difficulty of young bands touring. There's a lot of complication around touring around the world, all the kind of bits and pieces that you have to put together. And it's now going to be immensely complicated for bands to tour like that. And that's, of course, how young designers develop their craft, is working with those bands as they tour. And who knows how that's going to play out. Right now, there aren't answers, just like, the Northern Ireland situation just doesn't have answers at the moment. This is also true for, and it's sort of being held in abeyance at the moment because COVID isn't allowing people to travel anyway. But I think there's going to be a flurry of frustration as soon as the COVID, travel restrictions are somewhat opened. And also, I think how lucky I have been to learn from my colleagues in international opera houses, from artists, from curators. I have felt myself to be European. I have always considered myself. I love waking up in Paris. I like the way that the language changed the shape of my mouth. I think we learn from the other. And I think, I don't think anything is to be gained at this point in the planet's history from further separation. I think it's all about assimilating our knowledge and working together. So it seems to me, in answer to the question, things will become more difficult. Things that I took for granted, I will no longer be able to take for granted. But I am immensely fortunate and privileged in that I have been able to work as a European up until this point. So I'll do all I can to help smooth over those barriers that are going to be put in the next generation's way.
Yeah, totally. There's many things that upset me about it, thousands of things, but just the fundamental fact of, as you say, movement is critical. It's the kind of stuff that allows us to learn and to operate and to pick up things from different places. So to sort of restrict that is just, I don't know, it's unfathomable for me. But
unfathomable, indeed.
Our next question. Aviruk Roy, who's also an alumni from MA Intelligent Mobility.
My question to you is, all your installations, such huge installations going up across the world, do you ever get anxious about it? And what do you do to deal with that?
Do I get anxious?
Yeah, if you ever get anxious about the work that's been pulled off, because there's such huge installations across the world,
I get very,
do you
very
ever get anxious about it? And
yes. Because what I get really anxious about is I work in the abstract and I work with my team and I sketch and I draw, and then my team take my, embryonic sketches and use their, extraordinary powers of geometry to develop my thoughts. And then we deal in renders, and we kind of share renders with everybody who's invested in the project. And these are people who invested time or invested resources. And we all fall in love with the imaginary picture of what it's going to be. And then again, like I touched on earlier, there's this brute day of reckoning when you're in the car or walking or however you're getting there on the way to the site to see what's the reality. This has all been a fantasy. It's all been a suspension of disbelief. It's all been a projection. It's all been, a sustained and strenuous collective act of imagination. And then you have to go and meet the stuff, the matter. And there's an immense, do you know what? There's a sort of sense of shame about it, particularly now, the more that we use resources to make our stuff, you feel the weight of any resources used, particularly if you're using mirror and you're using, mirrors that are effectively, petrochemical based. And any, anything you use, and the car that, all of these things. And that, you're presenting an idea in service of perspective shift in the viewer. That you've done your thinking, that the thought beneath it all was sound, the conversations stacked up. You hope that the effect on the people who view it will be worth the input of the resources. But there is, especially when you go and see things and they're not finished yet, and that you can't really change them much. And that there's a sense of immense anxiety about it. And then quickly you recover. You're on site, you recover, and it's in that moment of sort of recovery from the trauma of seeing the real thing that the real work happens, I think, because you have to sort of adjust. You have to, grow from being the person who made something imaginary to being the person who's responsible for something actual and made of matter. And that's a really important little moment there. It's a traumatic moment if you look down the barrel of it, and you've got to take it very seriously. And you sort of do have to take time alone. I'm usually, when I turn up on a site, I usually break off. I'm normally with a lot of people, but I break away and I spend time on my own. And I go through a little process of grieving. I grieve that it isn't the render. I make my peace with what it really is. And then I try and fall in love with what it really is and adjust my thinking and my creative process to what it really is. And then grow from there, sort of graft some new thinking onto what the material really is and sort of honor the materials that have gone into making it. But it's not to be undertaken lightly, that process of going from the imagined to the concrete, and you've got to be prepared for it. Get a good night's sleep the night before, have breakfast, don't be drunk, and give yourself time and be alone. And if there are things that you realize are so out of kilter with what you intended, spend time with it, and you'll find ways to grow into a response to what you've actually made rather than what you thought you were making. There's always a disconnect, a dissonance.
I don't think there's enough emphasis placed on the breakfast as a design strategy. I think you're exactly right there, Ez. Thanks, Avaruk.
Grief and regret is massively important. You have to just look down the barrel of it and learn how to best use it.
Ez, forgive me if I'm being too nosy, say no comment, but do you ever, what are the conditions when you turn work down, or do you never turn work down, or do you say no? Or
turn down 80% of the things that we're asked to do. So we do 20%. And then of that 20%, I'd say usually about 60% comes to fruition.
Yeah.
It's that kind of, but you know, I'm not saying that to say, hey, we get asked to do stuff. We get asked to do all sorts of crazy stuff, you know, because as you noticed at the beginning, you know, I talk about it as a kind of bifurcating, rhizomic kind of branching structure, that if throughout your life, at the beginning of one's practice, you know, I was in the practice of getting to a path in the road. When it passed, I just took both paths at once. And then when those one passed, I just took both of those paths as well. And I don't have any more fingers at the end of my fingers, but if I had so as soon as you do that quite early on, it does mean, and it, as you know, bifurcating structures behave in a fractal way because they want to expose more and more of themselves to the air. Like that's why lungs do it, that's why trees do it, for gas exchange, you know, mass exposure purposes. And I think myself, you know, a sort of hunger for various reasons to expose myself to my cultural environment meant I went on those, you know, parallel bifurcating, you know, journeys, which meant saying yes a lot at the beginning. But it does now mean that each of those sort of, you know, tentacles is sitting now in so many different paths that people will write to me equally about, you know, designing an advert or making a hotel or a sports stadium, or, you know, it's quite unlimited, the areas of interest.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to turn down.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, a couple more questions. We've got Mingyu Zhu, who's a student in MA Textiles, who's got a question for you. Mingyu, are you out there? Let's see if she comes through.
I mean, it's a piece of advice I give to people, actually. You can do two things at once.
Yeah. Hey, Mingyu. I like your picture, Mingyu, with your phone and sunglasses. Cool.
Hi, thank you. Great to meet you. So my question is, what considerations or researches do you usually do to make your work understood by audience with different cultural backgrounds?
I mean, this is a great question. And I guess I work a lot, I think, with emotional response, with light and music that I hope are able to transition across cultural borders. You know, it's been my experience, having spent quite a lot of time in different places on the planet, that, of course, you know, things will be interpreted through the lens of each culture, but equally there are, you know, resonant bass drum notes that will have their effect on people physiologically, as, you know, on their rib cage structure at a human level. And there are qualities of light. There are qualities of chemical lights, you know, different qualities of incandescence in tungsten lights, different chemical reactions going on in LED light that will transcend those boundaries. So I guess I tend to, when I'm making work that I know is going to be seen across a range of cultures, I might gravitate towards those things that I consider can cross those boundaries. But sometimes, you know, the primary text that we were talking about earlier is very, very specific. And it's written, you know, from a very specific cultural viewpoint. For example, there was a play that I worked on in 2013 called Chimerica that was written by an English playwright who had been to neither China nor America, and yet was writing with some insight, I felt, about both. That said, I do not know how that piece was received in China or America. You know, it did actually become an HBO series, so I think it was refined for that. But it's very true that often we're working on global subjects in very confined, theatres in London. That was at the Almeida Theatre. It then transferred to the West End. But yeah, I mean, research again is really the answer. Reading from critical thinkers from within the cultural context that the work is written, or from a series of cultural contexts, and actually just trying to be generally informed, trying to keep up, trying to read a lot, and trying to get out when one is traveling, trying to immerse in the culture. I mean, I've been immersed recently in the UAE, which is a culture I had nothing to do with ever until last year. And my biases and preconceptions about particularly women in that culture were very fixed in my mind. And then I just spent a bunch of time with some really badass, fierce Emirati women. And took that really to shake me out of my absolute certainty from a distance, which was really contested by my experience on the ground.
Thanks, Mingyu. Nice bookcase, Mingyu. Good work. Thank you. Christopher McCarthy is next. And Christopher's a supporter of the RCA, and he's got a question for you about art and design. So, Christopher, we've got a few more minutes, Ez, if you're okay. We've got another one after this, and then we'll kind of wrap up, if that's all right.
Sure. I'll cook dinner afterwards.
What are you having? Anything nice?
Oh, I don't know yet. I'm going to get inspired. Hello.
Hi, Christopher.
Hello. Thank you very much for your time. It's been really, really interesting so far.
Oh, good.
A huge fan of your work, especially in the fashion arena. I loved what you did for Louis Vuitton Cruise over in Brazil. So my question is, do you think the influence of art and fashion on each other is increasing and decreasing?
Increasing, sure. And I'll say why. I think it's to do with this little scrolling square, whether it's Instagram or however you scroll your squares on your portable device. I think what's been interesting about it is, the barriers to entry. If you think about a fashion show, no one could go. I had never been to a fashion show. No one went. You couldn't go. It was so exclusive. And even art galleries felt exclusive to some, or geographically, exclusive to many who couldn't travel. So I think that ability to choose and curate who you're going to follow on your social media, especially your Instagram, your visual social media, where you can, in one sweep, view a fashion show, a piece of sculpture, a piece of woven art, a piece of painting. If you were careful, and the way that I use Instagram is I follow artists, I follow practitioners, I follow graduates, I follow, carpenters, I follow people who carve wood, I follow potters, I follow ceramicists. And every morning, if I go and have a look at that, anyone who, I'm afraid, forgive me, anyone who puts a picture of themselves or their food, I tend to unfollow. But if they're photographing their practice, then I feel like I'm in a sort of daily art gallery every day. And I think, therefore, when you ask about the boundaries between art, sculpture, environmental art, and fashion, clearly, the people who work in any of those media are becoming so much more porous to each other than ever before. And the kind of, again, talking about hierarchies within these genres or between these genres, these hierarchies get broken down because everything exists. You only get that big of a square. Doesn't matter whether you're Louis Vuitton or whether you are someone in your bedroom doing some painting, your square is the same size. And if that square is beautiful and attractive and worth looking at, then people will look at it. And I think there's a real leveler in that. I know the algorithms kind of fuck with it a bit, but in principle, I'm really supportive of it as a medium.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. We're going to squeeze one more in. I'm probably being told off on time, but I'm desperate to get all the students to ask you their questions. So Maria, are you out there, Maria Koch? Maria's a student on MRes Communication Design. I'm just reading her bio while she comes through. Maria, you're described by your colleagues as an agitator. That's a great designation. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, Ez. Really nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
My question to you is, what kind of reflections do you want to evoke in people's minds with your work?
I mean, listen, lately, I've spent, 25 years working, as Graham mentioned, in in support of and in response to primary text. And it's only really in the last 5 years that I would say had the confidence to try and write any text myself. I think I have been quietly, invidiously writing text in my responses to primary text all this time, but to actually come out and say, this is my text, it has been more recent that I've had the courage to do that, I guess. And in looking for what to focus my energies on, I've been guided a lot by Hansel Ricobris, the curator at the Serpentine Gallery, who has really guided my reading and introduced me to the work of Timothy Morton 5 years ago, who wrote a manifesto for artists and said, listen, don't try to preach to your audience, just try to amaze them into shifting their perspective. And I guess at a time where I was looking to begin to write the text of the work, I kind of, in sort of, avoiding a primary text, I was looking for guidance, and this was very helpful to me. So the work that I've been making, the installation work where I've been kind of writing my own script, but usually using my own voice as well, and reading my own script for it, has been around perspective shift, and largely around, what I consider to be the most important perspective shift that we need to make, which is in our attitude towards our connection to the planet at the most profound level. Can we actually recognize that we're connected? And in this, again, I've been guided by David Abram, who's a remarkable eco-philosopher. He was a sleight of hand magician and is now that as well as an eco-philosopher. So he's my kind of guy. And I think his sleight of hand magicianing led him also, a bit like Timothy Morton, to consider where are the chinks in people's cerebral or intellectual armor? Where are the chinks where you can actually get through and invite people to change their minds? And how do you remind people when there's so much? We just talked about, the gorgeous scrolling of all the makings of humans on an Instagram feed. How do you cut through that and remind people that the systems within them are made of exactly the same maths as the systems of the trees around them? How do we remind people of that so that they'll feel connected? And especially in the case of my children, I'm not sure my children realize that they actually need the natural world. They're so caught up in the hall of mirrors of human code and human makings. So I guess that's the project, really, and that's what I would hope lands on the minds of the audiences in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Ez, I feel like we've really squeezed you for the hour in terms of the amount of information that we've got through. It's been fantastic. It's been so nice to chat with you and to catch up with you. I've really, really enjoyed it. And I know you have a book project on the go. How's it going? Is it due out soon?
Funny you should mention that. I have some prototypes in my book.
Give us a preview.
This is a baby book. I like this one because it's small, but it's books with holes in it.
Lovely.
Have lots of gorgeous holes and layers and things.
Wow.
This is the baby one. And then this is the giant one, which is so heavy. I'm not even going to lift it up. But I'm procrastinating. I'm very slow. This book is like 4 years late and it was due in on January. So yeah, the publishers are getting a little cross, but it will happen. This is, it's on its way. It's being co-authored by lots of the Royal College people are helping me with it. We will get there.
Great. I really look forward to seeing it, and lovely to meet you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really generous of you to give us so much of your time, and you're so eloquent, and I think the way you've described your practice is fascinating and very, very inspiring for all of us. Big thank you.